Hey, are you a business owner, entrepreneur, or professional? If so, we want you to apply to be a featured guest on our show. My name is Adam Torres, and I host the Mission Matters series of podcasts. I've recorded over 3,000 episodes, and we are just getting started. How do you know if you'd be a good guest to be on the show? Well, only one way to find out, and that's to apply, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We want guests that have a story to tell, guests with a brand, a product, or a service that can benefit my audience of listeners. If this sounds like you, go to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. I'd love to talk to you and get to know more about your story. Again, head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, now let's get into the show.
Thanks everyone for tuning in for another exciting episode of our Mission Matters Club. This week's episode is experiencing imposter syndrome and how do you deal with it. This was a commonly asked topic, and this one was actually sourced by many authors. Actually, they had requested it. This actually came down from bottom up. Really, our supporters were the ones who requested this, right? For some of our speakers. So I'm definitely excited about this topic. I think a lot of people have experienced this, myself included. And just to kick this off, just to give everyone a background, we're Mission Matters. We're a media platform focused on the needs of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. And really, our mission is to amplify your stories so that we can continue to inspire and educate future generations. And so we always put together weekly events every Thursday at 4 p.m. PST for all the West Coasters. And I want to make sure that it's convenient for our East Coasters so that they can join as well. And so with today's topic being, experiencing imposter syndrome, we wanted to highlight, what are all the different ways that you could overcome this? Because I feel like this is a pretty common topic that's talked about, especially more frequently. And all that being said, why don't we start it off, Adam, by having all of our guests and panelists introduce themselves, and then we can just kick it off. So for that, take the lead. Go for it.
All right, let's do it. Well, excited to have everyone here today and excited about the topic. I'm because I have these conversations pretty often, and I think it'll be interesting to hear everybody's take. And I think Chirag mentioned this. We will be recording this, and this will go out on the website and other things like that. So we're creating a whole Clubhouse page, and we have a catalog of all the old episodes. They're not up yet, but I think they have maybe 10 to 12. This might be episode 13 so far. So we have a whole catalog of these things going out. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this builds up. So that being said, let's just start, top left and make our way right. And we'll all do a brief introduction and go for there. So Ben, if you want to kick us off, please.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Banu, and I'm from the Great White North. I live in Canada. Been in IT for a little bit more than a decade, and I got in touch with Mission Matters through a book publication, which was my first venture as an author. And my topic was on empathy, which is a topic very close to my heart, and I'm hoping that would be one of the aspects that I can share with you when it comes to overcoming imposter syndrome as well.
All right. Thank you, Banu. And then Catherine, please. Catherine, if you want to go next.
Good evening, Dr. Catherine Wilder. I'm a sports psychologist. I have my doctorate in counseling and psychology. And I have had my private practice for over 20 years, working with recreational student athletes and elite athletes on peak performance. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Wilder, so great to talk to you. It's probably been maybe a year and a half. I'm so excited to connect with you and to get your input on this, especially considering the cyclists and the athletes that you work with. This is going to be good. So thank you for joining us. So Rita, please, if you want to go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rita. I co-authored a book with Mission Matters, and my topic was on the decency question, diversity, differences, and decency. And I actually helm a company based out of New York City, which is built upon empowering women and minority groups with confidence being the crux of everything. So the topic of imposter syndrome, this is perfect to everything that I do as well. So I'm excited to be here today and also see what everyone has to say on the topic.
All right. Thank you. And Sharif, welcome.
Good afternoon, Adam. Thanks for having me. My name is Sharif Al-Mamoun. I'm the president and CEO of a consulting company named iLinks. We provide IT modernization services to healthcare, transportation, and government agencies. I've also recently started a podcast called Impact by Sharif Al-Mamoun. It's in production, so hopefully someday I can invite all of you guys to join me. I've also been lucky to be part of Mission Matter, I believe that's Volume 5 Leadership. So I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on imposter syndrome, because I think as you are growing your business from scratch, every step of the way, you definitely question yourself. So I think it will be an interesting discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Brian, welcome.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So my name is Brian Patrick. I'm one of the authors for Mission Matters. That was Volume 4 and Volume 11. I call myself now a recovering IT project manager, if that makes any sense to anyone. Came up from startups back in the 90s, survived everything from dot-com boom, bust, whatever happened after that during the Great Recession, survived straight through Y2K, all the way up to here we are, and working in large banks, big four companies, consulting and management roles, and then back into my own startup called Greenlight Startup. So basically, I've turned full circle. My goal now with Greenlight Startup Inc. is to help other startups to not make the same mistakes that so many millions of others that have made, to use those lessons learned, to have a shared kind of a brokering relationship in terms of information brokering, allowing companies to evaluate themselves, to ensure that they have the right skill set, the right organizational maturity, so that they approach the right kind of people to fund and invest in them, and vice versa for investors to make better choices about where they put their money based upon their risk profile. So my hope is that when we talk about imposter syndrome, this really speaks to a lot of what I had to do to build myself up when I was not in the most represented group that you would see in most of corporate America. So that feeling, the sensation, whether it was real or not, if you perceive it, it might as well be real. And that can be both a positive and negative. So I look forward to this conversation, and I'd love to share my experiences there.
All right, thank you, Brian. And just for everybody, especially a couple new faces on here. So this is really more of a fireside chat. So for those of you that have been on the podcast where I ask questions and then we kind of wait and go from there, this is really if you care to piggyback on what somebody said, or you want to elaborate or add your input, you can feel free really to just jump right in. So myself as host on this, my goal is really to keep the conversation moving, but really this is about us just having that fireside chat feel and really just building the community and also getting to know each other. So that's a big part of this in creating this content. So I guess just to open it up to the floor, maybe it makes sense to kind of define what imposter syndrome is. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I think in summary, it's really those moments when you question yourself, right?
Exactly. I feel the same thing. It's really about assessing where you stand. I think Brian kind of summed it up nicely as well when he was ending his introduction, where he said, it comes from the times when I didn't feel myself represented somewhere. And then you start questioning whether or not you deserve certain things. So it's a lot of reflection on your self-worth, about yourself, your self-value, and where you place yourself in light of the surroundings that you see.
Yeah, thinking about what imposter syndrome means, and maybe I should let me look that up real quick while we're at it. Obviously, I'm in front of a computer just to see because I've heard a lot of different things. Okay, so here we go. So, and this is from the mighty Google. I don't know if this is a really good source here, but imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. It disproportionately affects high-achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments. Many question whether they're deserving of accolades. So, now that I kind of went a little bit further into that, if anybody wants to share their thoughts on that or an angle on there, because a couple words that, stick out to me in this definition: high-achieving people don't believe they deserve their accomplishments. Tell me a little bit more, anybody care to chime in on that?
So I'll just quickly add, so I think it's when anyone has self-doubt over something they know they can do really well. And the reason I think your definition mentions high-achieving individuals is because they're very accomplished at doing certain things. And the more they do it, there's sometimes that moment of doubt, that moment of just questioning that comes up, hence the imposter syndrome. And actually, I don't know which definition you're looking up, Adam, but usually the syndrome is spelled with an OR rather than the word imposter with an ER. which is interesting because the syndrome as well, from a scientifically defined term, is actually with a capital I, capital S as an official syndrome with the OR bit. And it's something that's out there. It's something that people have taken medication for in the past as well, because it is something that really affects their well-being. It starts from your confidence and self-doubt, and it can really, really spiral out of control if not controlled. So I think a lot of it is just that moment of self-doubt, which is where it kind of stems from ultimately. And there's been a lot more research on women, which is why women score quite highly on the imposter syndrome count, although it does affect everyone. I don't think there's a single male I've ever spoken to that hasn't at some point also gone through it as well. So this is something that really affects everybody. And I would argue not just high achievers, everybody.
Do you think it starts from your insecurities? Because we all have some, right? As you grow up, you collect some of those. As you grow, obviously you shake some of those off. You build different routine or different practices to sort of get rid of some of those. But regardless of who you are as a person, I think there's definitely some insecurities. Do you think that the definition means that when those insecurities sort of jumps back on, is that really the definition of it?
I think I can chime in here that the research supports that imposter syndrome is actually linked to perfectionism. And, I've seen this in my athletes that especially when they're nervous, they're right before they're ready to get on the starting line, for some reason, they haven't fully internalized their accomplishments. And so what creeps in is a bit of self-doubt. To change this up, we need to reframe, and sometimes that's what the best coaches do, but we need to change perception, raise confidence, lower anxiety so that they can perform. Let me know if you have any questions on that.
Made me my mind abuzz a little bit. One of the things that I thought about with this subject is so much of what I felt, and yes, sometimes still do. I'm 52 years old. I still feel it. I can't ever really fully excise it from me. But one of the things I wonder is, I wonder how much of that feeling, this imposter syndrome, or whatever we want to call it, I wonder how much of this started roughly around either like middle school and high school. Because every film you see, so many stories you read about, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, it seems like it crests the questioning of your value. I think so many people I've spoken to, it seems like something happened between middle school and high school that just accelerated that. And then whatever you go into, whether it's athletics, whether it goes in corporate America or anything, I wonder, I had to ask you, I wonder, have you noticed that some kind of correlation between experiences around that period of people's lives, early, late adolescence? Does that seem to be like the biggest turning point when it comes to this kind of syndrome, or have you seen something different?
So if we just stick with the athletic realm, by age 13, approximately 70% of youth athletes drop out of sport. Why? It's usually because they don't think they're good enough now, and therefore they won't be good enough. So it's so critical. And yes, I do see it with athletes, as we go into high school. It's so critical for young people like that, to have a tremendous role model, support system. That support system can be at home or it can come from their peers. But during those years, absolutely, that can be the beginning seeds of imposter syndrome.
Very interesting point to mention, because it is true, like personally, even when I have experienced it, it tends to be during times of great distress, or I'm worried about something, or I'm extremely nervous. So that alludes to your earlier point, Catherine. It's interesting that you mentioned about the teenage phase as well, because one of the things that I noticed was at work, whenever I was in an environment where I didn't get proper feedback, and I wanted to move further up in the career, and I wanted to do something different, but when I felt like my feedback loop wasn't in a constructive fashion, and it was just sort of like Yeah, you're great, you're great, you're great. And you kind of move on. You start questioning if, what you're hearing is the right thing. So sometimes I feel it's also the structure around us as a society, because I also think sometimes we only look at the tips of iceberg for other people. And when we open up our social media, we see someone has gotten a new job, someone got a new promotion, someone just had a milestone that they achieved. We're literally just looking at that tip of the iceberg, and suddenly collectively, how in Seinfeld, George is trying to get that apartment, and he talks about how collectively in 3 hours his life looks good. And that's sort of what you think about when you're looking at the social media, where you go, oh, all these people are putting in all their updates in life, and suddenly their life looks so much better. And when you're trying for something similar, you start wondering whether you deserve that or not.
Yes, all excellent points. That question of, right, am I good enough? Do I deserve this? Do my past accomplishment mean anything for me to move forward and to be exceptional in this realm? One area that's difficult for athletes, and where this can creep in as well, is when they've had an injury and they're coming back from an injury. So even if they had been 4-time world champion, they're at the world championships, it creeps in their head that, okay, I've been out for 6 months, I'm behind, I haven't trained hard enough, I haven't trained well enough.
So is imposter syndrome, I know we've talked a lot about, the professional side of things. Is imposter syndrome mostly on the professional side? Can that also be in our personal life? Or is it compartmentalized? I mean, how does all that kind of stuff work? I'm curious. Or anybody's opinion on that.
I think it's both, right? If you think about it, where does your professional success comes from? You as a person, how you contribute, what you do with your life sort of leads to your professional success, right? So I think those insecurities are really personal insecurities. And I think those wakes up more at your low points. Like I think Dr. Catherine was giving an example. When athletes at low points, that's when they're more thinking about, am I good enough? Can I actually do this, even though they have a track record of success? So I think it's more personal that sort of flows into your professional career as well.
I actually have a personal anecdote based on a relationship or a person that I knew in my life. But it's interesting when we talk about how this creeps into your personal life as well, because when you notice this in your professional side of things, often I find that the person who's impacted the most is yourself. Because in a way, when you think that you don't deserve something, the actions that you take eventually prevent you from progressing to a certain amount, because you think you don't deserve certain things, and therefore you hold yourself back in some way, or you don't try as much as you would normally do if you had the confidence. But I've seen this. One of my friends, she was going through a very tough time, and unfortunately her spouse, I felt that he was getting this feeling because they both were doctors, and it wasn't like, in my community it's very common to have arranged marriage. So they had these conversations and then they got married, and I feel like the husband sort of had an imposter syndrome in the sense that he always used to think he did not deserve my friend in some way. So it was almost like he reached beyond what he was destined for and he got someone more. And unfortunately, that led into a lot of ego clashes, and there was almost this inferiority, superiority kind of complex whereby he wanted to be superior, but he was experiencing this imposter syndrome, which was also inferiority complex. And it came out in a very shabby kind of way. And unfortunately, they're not together today, but it can definitely, I feel, manifest itself in professional and personal surroundings.
What a great example. That's two great examples, Banu. You're stuck. We're gonna make you come to all these. Chirag, you make sure we get her signed up to all of them. I love the Seinfeld reference, and that's another great one. Thank you. And I think I want to share something about like just something I've noticed about imposter syndrome because it for people that when I was kind of preparing for this, I was kind of thinking about like our platform overall and some of the things we do. And I'll tell you, like, obviously, if you've been following the brand for a long time, for those listening, I mean, we've interviewed a lot of people. So, like, we're going on over 4,000 interviews. And sometimes I'll have somebody on the line that is like really accomplished in business and otherwise. And I mean, they're definitely my senior, by the way, many times in terms of just age. And when I'm talking to them, kind of doing the warm up or things like that, like they're obviously they're appreciative to be on the show, they're appreciative to talk about their business, but sometimes they don't feel like they deserve it. And I hype them up and I kind of get them in a good mindset and mood. And I'll tell them and not this isn't in self-depreciating humor either. It's just literal. Like I'll tell them, I'll say, you're way more accomplished in business than me. You've done a lot more. I hope to, emulate some of the things that you've done, assuming that this is correct, right? So I don't say the same thing to each person, but I'll let them know that authentically when it is the case, of course. And it's interesting to see how in different settings or different scenarios, maybe when somebody's not in their normal realm, to see how imposter syndrome can kind of creep in. And I mean, on our end, even when we add a new platform or something, when Chirag makes me do something new, so to speak, for the like TikTok or something else, I'm like, oh man, we have to do what? And it's not my comfort zone. I'm like, oh man, like, should I be doing this? Like, does it make sense? Like, is it going to be good for the brand? And like all these other things that creep in my head after doing this for quite a bit of time. So I guess what I'd like to ask is when somebody's out there, trying something new or doing something different, and they maybe don't feel that they should be, and that imposter syndrome starts to kind of creep in. What are some tools or maybe just some things that you've done, if you've ever experienced it in that sense, by the way, that maybe helped you get over that and kind of make that step forward into, let's just say, a new realm, new land, if you will?
So I love that analogy, Adam, that you've mentioned, because we all go through new things. I mean, going from pre-pandemic to pandemic and now slowly creeping out and again, that was taking everyone out of their comfort zones as well. And people dealt with them in their own different sort of ways. So I think confidence actually plays a big part in this, your approach to things. If you are feeling in a good state of mind and more confident, you sometimes can snap out of it, quote unquote, quicker than if you weren't. So some of the techniques I've used on some of my clients to get into that confidence mind frame is that when you are delivering something, whether it's a new technology, a new speech, whatever it is, even if you were doing the identical speech to somebody else, you have your own unique personal stories and ways of doing things, and nobody can take that away from you. So even if you were to slip up or say the wrong thing, just getting the ability to just move on quickly as though that was always part of the line, that takes practice and it takes confidence to do that. So I tell people, just know your stuff really, really well. So just practice like you do with anything else in life. The more you practice, the more you're going to feel better about it. And just realize that the way you're delivering something, whatever it is unique. You're doing it in your own way. And have those personal examples, those anecdotes ready to go so you can use those. And that is who you are. And I think that is part of getting over this, getting into the new phase of life things. But then the other part of imposter syndrome, so the one you've described, is the more, trying something new for the first time, Adam. Then the other side is, when you're about to do something that you're used to doing over and over again, and then something creeps in so much so that it almost debilitates you from being able to do it. And if you are in that situation, sometimes what I said to my clients is just take a deep breath where you are, just rekindle yourself, and, there are certain trigger words that can help you sort of just refocus your mind again. There are certain skills that you can practice, like if I forget my lines, I'm giving a keynote talk, or I'm trying to deliver something on stage and I'm not allowed to a performance and I've forgotten my lines. What do you do to kind of quickly go back on track so that the audience might suspect a little bit of a blip, but it's almost, they don't know whether it was intended or not. And again, that is almost practicing these hacks over and over again. Something else I like telling folks is power posing, because there are two hormones in our body that can really help us with nerves and confidence. One is cortisol, one is testosterone. When you're nervous, we have a lot of cortisol in our bodies and a lower amount of testosterone. When we're feeling confident, the reverse is true. Our cortisol hormone levels are lower and our testosterone is higher. So doing certain poses or taking deep breaths or saying these quick mantras in your head can really, really help reverse that. Research has actually shown that just doing that for between 30 seconds to 2 minutes can help reverse that. So these sort of hacks, I think, are really useful if you're actually up on stage, you're about to pitch in a board meeting, or you're about to launch a new platform for the first time. So thought I'd just share a couple of those tricks of the trade, so to speak.
I think that was really well said. From my life, what I've noticed is those routine that I built over the years to sort of keep me sane, keep me on check, has helped me quite a bit. When I sort of look back my life journey, being a Middle Eastern Asian background, my family did not really have any. I've never seen anybody business oriented. Everybody was fairly well educated. That was sort of their background. So starting a business was definitely a completely different way of going. So every step of the way, there was definitely a lot of no that I had to kind of sort of find my ways of deal with. And then in my early 20s, I've gone through a marriage, divorce, and was a single parent for a long time. And throughout that process too, that was also very new to me and to my family and culture. Dealing with that as well, I think there was a lot of reason that gave me to become insecure, regardless of what my accomplishments was, work-wise, education-wise. There was definitely a lot of things that I could have been proud of, but there was definitely those moments that I had because of those upbringing or childhood insecurities or those specific events that happened in my life made me question a lot of those things. But to deal with it, there are a couple of things I've always used. One, I always remembered my why. And my why for wanting to grow, wanting to change, wanting to become a better person, and wanting to continue to do things that I think that's right was because of my strong why. And my why was that I wanted to remain a successful parent, play the role of a mom and dad to my daughter's life. And now in my 40s, my daughter is in college. And looking back in my life, it gives me even stronger reason to feel more confident that even though there were a lot of those ups and downs and moments that I've had, there are definitely success stories. But those, I think, remembering my why kept me on the path. And second was building your routine. Everyone, all the motivational speaker that you hear, they all talk about your morning routine. And I don't think it has to be a specific routine. You sort of create your own. So over the years, I built up my routine of waking up in the morning. Typically, I'll meditate. Before I go to sleep, a lot of times I'll listen to some of the motivational speech that I really like. So throughout the day, I have built some routines that sort of keeps me in check. Granted, it doesn't happen every day, but I can guarantee you almost 90% of the time, I follow those routines, and that sort of kept me in the path. Still have those moments here and there, but because of this routine, because of those gratitude that I usually give or think about, sort of keeps me in the right path and keeps reminding me what my why am I doing certain things, and also it reminds me of the accomplishment that I've done by myself throughout this last 45 years.
Thanks for sharing that, Chirag. I want to echo one point that he was mentioning about the self-awareness aspect. And we actually undermine the need to know oneself so much today because we're always running behind information. We say information is power, data is power, data analytics is the best thing you can do for your business. But all these are external loci of control in the sense that we're constantly looking outward to fix something that is actually happening inside of us. So the way we can conquer the outside world is first to conquer oneself. So some of the concepts that both Rita and Sharif shared about knowing why you do certain things, doing that meditation aspect, doing certain poses and understanding what makes you feel more comfortable, what makes you calm, what makes you agitated, understanding those triggers are so important. One thing that I learned early on in my life and I'm very thankful for is this concept called the Johari window. It's spelled Johari. And what that does is it basically breaks your personality into 4 quadrants. One quadrant is what you know and what the world knows about you. So there is the commonality of genuinity and authenticity about who you are, and therefore the other person knows as well. Another window is what you know about yourself, but the external world doesn't know. And these are things that you want to minimize, because the more talents you have, you really want to show it out to the world and make sure that they address you for that. And therefore, you start feeling that sense of acceptance from the society as well, minimizing that imposter syndrome feeling. The third quadrant is sort of what other people notice about you, but you haven't noticed about yourself. And this is the part that I was talking about earlier, whereby if you don't get good feedback loop from people around you, it's really hard for you to see certain things, because everyone's eyes give you different perspectives. And if you don't get that perspective back to you, it's hard for you to see what you're doing. And the last quadrant is basically what you don't know about yourself and what others don't know about you either. And I think that's the point where, Adam, you were talking about, entering new ventures, that things may come up in front of you, but you wouldn't necessarily muster up the guts to go and expand that. So this is the window that you don't really know, this is the quadrant that you don't really know how big and how deep it is. But it's important that the more we challenge ourselves to do things that we've never done before, stepping out of our comfort zone is what will reduce the amount of things that are hidden in this window. So I usually look at that approach in terms of seeing what kind of things am I scared about? What are the things that I know about myself, and how much can expand in terms of knowing more about yourself? Not to get too philosophical or yogic-like, but the truth is that the more we know about ourselves, the better we are preparing ourselves to face the world. And that's the challenge that a lot of people need to do, as opposed to focusing outwards and also looking at social media and measuring ourselves against other people. It should really be measuring yourself against yourself. Yesterday, I wasn't able to do something, and today I can. I recently became an aunt. So I have a niece now. My sister had a daughter. And it's funny, now that she's on her path to conquering, she's more athletic than I am. So she was very upset that during pregnancy, she couldn't do a lot of athletic stuff. And now that she's getting back to her flexibility and things like that, every day she breaks into the smile where she says, oh my God, yesterday I couldn't bend down and today I'm able to bend. I couldn't touch my toes yesterday and now I can. And even though there are tiny milestones, the meditation that she does, the stretching that she does, it's inching her a little bit closer to how she was before. And that's helping her become more self-aware. And the last thing that I kind of wanted to touch upon as well is that sense of control. Instead of leaving your sense of control to the outside world that kind of defines who you are and what you need to do, I would really encourage people to actively seek out what they want to do. So people usually tell me, a few people that I've mentored, they're new to the industry, and they tell me, oh, I don't know what kind of job I want to get into. I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I just tell them, why don't you go on Indeed one day or any kind of job portal one day and search for all the jobs that are out there and take a list of, or an inventory list of things that you really enjoy doing. What do you see? What do these words speak to you? And how do you sense that they will help you? And as part of that, what they do is they take an inventory and eventually they come up with their own job description that they actually like. Now, it's a very small chance that they will find an exact job that matches it. But after that, at least they know what they like and what they don't like. And eventually what that does is, when you know that you like something, it's like how they say the saying that if you love what you do, then you're not working a single day in your life. I think the imposter syndrome aspect will melt away a little bit as well, because now you're doing things you like. And I don't think sometimes people really have the time to think about whether or not they deserve it, because they're driven by a different kind of passion, as opposed to wondering whether or not they deserve what they're doing, because they know they've put in the effort and they're actively pursuing that. So those would be my 2 cents.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much to think about. I like Sharif when you said about remember your why. That's still ringing in my ears. And Vanu, what you were just saying before, as far as I totally get into that. If I may, there's something I wanted to add. One of my things I do for inspiration is I listen to the mixtape version of Hamilton the musical. There's some really great stuff in there. For those of you who didn't see the musical, it's absolutely amazing. If you can see it on Disney Plus or somewhere, I highly recommend it. Not just for historical reasons, but it's a very inspirational story. Also, it's a story of imperfection. He was not perfect, and they show it. The line that somehow screams out of me is from a song called "Wait for It," and it's "I am not falling behind or running late. I am not standing still. I'm lying in wait." I like that one because I feel like a lot of the things that we're trying to do is that idea that you got to race, you got to get it done fast now. Everything's now. Everything's in the moment. Answer that phone call now. Answer that direct message now. Everything is direct, immediate, all the time, in present. To be quite frank, from my experience, I can't speak for anyone else here, but from my experience, I would say the most profound things that have ever happened to me did not happen by my deliberate action. The deliberate action happens because some things have to happen in the present. But the things that were most profound, the things that advanced me in my career, that got me job opportunities, that got me business opportunities, that keep me employed, that keep me moving forward, the most profound things are things that I was waiting for. But wait does not mean that you're sitting back, that you're just submissive and ready. But the opportunity has not come yet. I can't make certain opportunities come, but I can make myself ready for it. I think that some of the imposter syndrome also is that idea of, back to the idea of deserving. When I felt that way, I always felt like I had to make things happen because it won't happen. They won't happen unless I do something dramatic. And there's some, and there is some truth in that there are certain things that there's a certain effort that we have to provide, but it's usually in the case of an athlete, so kind of to what you were speaking about. I think you might be able to speak to this better than I can, but as an athlete, I can't make the game happen. I'm participating in it. I'm a participative, engaged member, interacting with a number of different players and opponents as well as my own players. I can make a play in the game. I can't make the game occur. I can't change the course of the game. I can, however, modify and change how I play, how I participate, or in some cases, how I do not interact. Sometimes lack of interaction can actually be helpful in terms of a sports event, depending on the activity. Same thing in business. Sometimes the best maneuver is no maneuver. Sometimes there is no win. It's a lose-lose. Stay out of it. Allow things to happen, but be ready, lying in wait for the opportunity. As my father says, sometimes you have to let other people fail because they just have to fail. And I do believe that's a personal opinion. Sometimes you have to allow for certain things to happen so that it becomes a learning experience. And you basically can step in as the expert. And without being accusatory, you can ask the question, so why do we think this happened? Do we have an understanding of it? And that's where your competency, I think, kicks in. This is, at least from my experience, sometimes I allow things to not always work out perfectly without trying to rail against the system, but I'll be lying in wait until it comes up, and then I can interject a question, not telling them what to do. It's not that I told you so. It's I'm now setting off the idea that I don't deserve it because I'm too busy focused on what I do know and why I know it. And that's where I think I've been able to kind of get past that syndrome of I'm not deserving. It's not a matter of deserving. It's a matter of I've seen this before, but I had to let someone else experience it sometimes. Then we can have a better dialogue and conversation about the event. So in that case, I feel like I've earned my stripes. At least that's how I've tried to address it.
That's great, Brian. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess I'd lean on maybe Rita or Catherine and Brian, actually, I think you even wrote about this at one point, and that was specifically talking about imposter syndrome with women co-founders of companies, of startups specifically. And I know that came up multiple times in the Women in Business book, volume 1. And if my memory serves me correct, I mean, I read all our books, of course. I think you might have written about that also, Brian, in terms of when somebody's pitching for capital for a new startup. Does anybody care to comment on kind of that scenario and how it works specifically with women and startups versus, I think I'm almost positive, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you wrote about that. Am I off on that one?
No, you're right. And in fact,
come on, there goes my memory. I'm happy on that one. Sorry, Brian.
You're solid, man. You are solid. I'll pull it up real quick because I had to go back to my own book. It was the technique number 3 where it says stop sabotaging your own pitch. And this was from a report that was done by HSBC Global Private Bank. The report was called Cheese to Business. They said roughly about 54% of female entrepreneurs from the United Kingdom, roughly 46% in the United States reported a combination of gender biased questions, which caused them to basically, when the respondents asked, they said that it impacted these questions that tended to be gender biased, altered their self-perception of their leadership ability, and in many cases caused them to question their very pitch. In some cases, they've even admitted that when they were doing pitches, that they actually had brought up, not only were they very honest about certain capability gaps, but sometimes they would offer up additional information that would support that, in the idea that, yes, I'm being honest, I'm being open, I'm being transparent. Unfortunately, in a male-dominated area such as venture capital, limited partnerships, that it's almost as if you've reinforced the doubt in the other person at the other end of the table. So I just had to mention that that's where it was. So you're right. Yes, I did mention that in my.
So Rita, do you care to comment on that at all? And just in terms of like how you maybe work with clients or otherwise there, because that's way above my podcasting pay grade, but I'm just interested to hear how the professionals handle this.
Yeah, so we actually get that similar to what Brian has just described. We see that a lot. So, for example, we also help women who might have taken some time off to raise their families. And when they're about to go to a job interview, for example, a lot of the questioning can be about, it almost looks accusatory to the woman that's coming in. And it could be something like, asking about childcare or asking about, taking time off or something like that. So one way of responding is almost panicking and thinking, gosh, somebody's accusing me, they're picking on me because I'm a woman, because I'm a mother, it's discriminatory. Therefore, they get into defensive mode, and therefore everything that comes out of their mouth from that point onwards sounds a bit defensive, and they're not on their A game anymore because they're trying to defend something else rather than sell their best self. However, the way we've tried to turn that on its head by saying, well, the reason, people shouldn't phrase things the way they should anyway, and that's a separate training we do for the interviewers aside, but if you get caught in that situation, think about it from their perspective. Why are they asking what they're asking? From their perspective, they just want someone to do the job. They want to make sure the job will, get done, and that you have a plan B in place. It's totally natural that, if you are the primary caregiver and a phone call comes from your child's school, what happens? So think of it from their perspective. You are applying for a job that you have to be there during those hours. And if you cannot, what's plan B? So if you think of it that way, you are going into problem-solving mode and you think one step ahead. So then you answer it with conviction rather than with self-doubt. And you're not trying to defend yourself. You're trying to say, absolutely, if something happens, I've got 3 people on speed dial, I've got this, or I've got a really supportive partner, or actually, you know what, my partner is the primary caregiver, I'm the secondary. Whatever it is, you have your responses in advance because they're asking the question not to trip you up, but because they genuinely want to know what's going to happen in the situation. By changing it around in that way and changing the perspective, it makes the person who's being interviewed feel empowered again. So then they can think, okay, I can prepare for these questions in advance. Similarly, if somebody's in a boardroom situation and they're pitching for business as well, what we tell our female clients versus our men is that less is more. Women, research has shown this, that have a habit of over-explaining things because they feel they have to justify why they're saying it, exactly to Brian's point, what he just mentioned. So what we try to do is say you start off with the minimal amount, less is more, like as though you're practicing everything you're saying to be that 10 to 15 second elevated pitch. You respond like that. If somebody genuinely wants to know more, they will ask you, and then you can go into the detail. But you do not start off your pitch with the detail because you've lost people, or they're going to start you're going around in circles in the same kind of way. That way, it's a lot more concise, it sounds more confident, and you can get your point across as well.
I absolutely appreciate all of those points. Thank you so much. And something that I would like to add, too, is for a point of being genuine and authenticity, because, right, if you have imposter syndrome, you have that feeling that you're being fake. But to remind yourself that it's normal not to know everything. And as you continue on your journey, that you will find out more as you progress. And so with that, it's really having a lot of self-compassion and kindness and awareness as well. And that self-awareness is also, it's very key to say, okay, it's key to recognizing the feelings of being an imposter or self-doubt when they do emerge. I have an example actually, just from this week. And I was on Sunday afternoon, I was called from the producer of Fox 29 News, and she asked me if I could be on for a segment for the Good Day Show with Mike and Alex. Now, she'll call me probably every 3 months, and she'll give me a topic, and she'll ask me to be on. So it was fantastic. So she gave me the topic. She prepped me. One thing that was different was that this was a Zoom interview instead of being live. And so there were definitely different variables, and there was a learning curve for me as far as the technology and the room setup. But that being said, on Sunday evening, I actually suffered from food poisoning. So I was up the majority of the night, getting sick. But I had my notes. I had the questions beforehand. I had done my research. I had my notes so that I could give the most concise sound bites. So I was ready and prepared, even though physically and mentally, I did not feel like I was in the realm of my A game, but I could rely on my preparation. So about half an hour before I'm to go on the air, I am called and said by a different executive producer, and she said, "We're changing your topic. The topic is Naomi Osaka and mental wellness, mental health, and whether or not it was warranted that she decided to back out of the press conferences." So all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling as sharp. And so I really had to use all of my tools. I had to use my good breathing. I had to reframe. I had to lock down right in the present and focus and say, yes, I do know that and I can address it. Rather than, a negative way to do that would have been, okay, wow, we're on live TV and this is going to live forever. And I just don't know if I can talk about this on such short notice. And not only that, I don't know the questions, that they're going to give. And so, I'm concerned that I may not, be as sharp as I'd like to be. So again, what did I have to do? I had to raise my confidence by saying, you've been in this situation before, perhaps, not getting sick, but just, stay on track, stay focused, jot down 3 important notes in points and make sure you get those across. So the interview went well. I was pleased with it, and I was able to give tips on mental wellness and mental tools for student athletes to have in their toolkit to reduce stress and anxiety.
Man, that was great, Dr. Wilder. I'm over here taking notes. I'm like, this is the way they and of course they give you like one of the biggest stories in media, like 30 minutes before. Of course they're gonna change that one in you, right?
Right. I couldn't do my due diligence or my preparation. I wanted to read, ESPN, New York Times. I wanted to get the information, Sports Illustrated. What is everyone else saying? But instead, I just had to focus on, okay, what's my take? And then once I did that, I knew I could be real and I knew I could be authentic. and I wouldn't stumble with my words.
That's great. So we normally do these for about an hour or so, and I guess my last thought here would be, of course, does anybody have any just last comments or tips or just things they want to share about imposter syndrome, or just things that they want to make sure we pay forward, so to speak, on this recording? All right. Well, if that's the case, then Chirag.
So, of course, thank you, everyone, all of our fellow panelists for joining us. This was actually an amazing conversation, and I took a lot of notes. I was texting Adam. I was like, "Wow, I think this is one of our best ones that we've had yet." And I feel like there could be like a round 2 on this one. Appreciate all you guys' time. Next week, we're hosting another panel discussion. Next week's topic is about motivation. So how do you pick yourself up after a down day? And maybe what tools, tactics do you implement so that you can get yourself back up? So with that, thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to sharing all of these clips with everyone. They're all recorded, so they'll go live very soon.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure meeting and listening to you all.
Thanks,
Likewise.
Dr. Wilder.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.